Welcome to Psych Sessions Mentoring. In these episodes, Mackenzie Peterson and Mona Shu chat with their guests about all things mentoring in higher education. So thanks for tuning in and welcome to Psych Sessions Mentoring.
I'm Mackenzie Peterson.
And I'm Mona Shu, and this is a special Psych Sessions series on mentoring.
Our guest today is Dr. Amy Hunter, professor of psychology at Seton Hall University. Dr. Hunter is a behavioral neuroscientist and a dedicated teacher and mentor, garnering accolades such as Seton Hall Faculty Teacher of the Year and Psychology Professor of the Year, awarded by the Seton Hall chapter of Psych-Hi. Dr. Hunter has also served in multiple leadership positions, including as department chair for 7 years, and is president-elect of the Eastern Psychological Association. Dr. Hunter has been a guest previously on Psych Sessions, and you can learn more about her and her teaching in episode 166, and more about STP's project syllabus in episode 78 of the Ask series. Of note, for our conversation today, Dr. Hunter is currently director of the Society for the Teaching of Psychology's Professional Development Mentoring Network. Welcome to our series on mentoring, Amy.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
We can just go ahead and dive right in. So let's go with the big question that we always ask. Amy, what is mentoring, or what does it mean to be a mentor?
I feel like that's such a broad thing, right? Involves a lot of different aspects of the job. So I feel like I've had mentors in a lot of different capacities, some in a much more strictly professional capacity, like you should be on this committee, and some in a much more informal social capacity of, folks who are just sort of checking in and making sure that I'm generally doing okay. So I feel like mentoring it's just such a really broad term, but I feel like that means there's a lot of space for people to have mentors in a lot of different areas of their lives and have multiple mentors, in fact.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of our guests that we've had have kind of had that same experience as you, that this is such a broad concept. And it's not just mentoring in the capacity of like students or even like the mentors that you had when you were in grad school. It's so many different areas of your life that you're experiencing mentorship.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I'm also realizing the longer I do this job, the more I realize that I'm still benefit from not only the things I learned along the way, maybe even by folks who maybe I didn't consider it a mentoring relationship at the time, but just sort of paying attention and watching people, I think can be mentoring in a way. It's obviously, I think it's more beneficial when it's a mutual relationship. But I think sometimes mentoring can almost be, you just sort of watch someone and think, oh, well, what would that person do? How would they think about this situation? What would they do here? So I think there are those kinds of opportunities, even for folks who don't have formal mutual mentoring relationships. I do feel like that's also, it's obviously different. It's not quite, I think, as rich as sort of a two-way relationship. But I think even mentoring, you can be mentored, I think, even by people that you admire in your field.
Yeah, like having a role model that you can look up to. And I think that's really helpful to still have people that you can look up to, even if you don't have that formal relationship. And I agree. I think maybe it's not quite as rich because you don't have that like really solid personal relationship with them, but there's still tons that you can learn from just looking at like these stellar people. Like, I think you could almost say that some of the people that we've interviewed on this podcast could be mentors to those who listen, even though they don't necessarily have like that really dynamic interpersonal relationship.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes people might not know where to start in terms of mentoring. They might not feel like there's somebody they can reach out to, or they don't know anybody personally. And like we're saying, I think a mutual relationship is more beneficial. But I feel like even for folks who don't feel like they don't know where to start, or they don't know who to ask, or there's someone who they really respect and admire and they're intimidated and they wouldn't want to ask them, I think there's still a lot you can learn that turns into sort of mentoring by observing. And like you said, by looking at folks who you consider to be role models.
And thinking about all your experiences mentoring, how would you describe your mentoring style?
Oh, that's a great question. So feel like this is something that I'm constantly trying to improve. I feel like it's also something that I'm constantly learning how to be a better mentor. And a lot of that I get from watching people who I consider to be mentors. So, I mean, one of my goals in general is transparency, to try to be explicit about things, about expectations. Anybody who's spent any time talking to me knows that I'm on the blunt side, which is sometimes, but not always, a good thing. So I feel like I tried to temper that a little bit, especially I'm trying to remember that if I'm mentoring someone, there's likely some kind of power dynamic, like especially with graduate students. And so I try to be super careful about the way that I say things and the way that I frame things, and to not necessarily just, run my mouth as I often do with my peers. So I'm trying to be supportive and encouraging. I try to think of mentees as not mentees, but as peers in the field. And I think that I'm getting better at also looking around and trying to think about how to elevate or provide opportunities for other people in the field, even if it's somebody who I'm not like an explicit mentoring relationship with. But I've gotten a lot of benefits in the field by people who I work with, who suggested that I do something or put my name into something, which I feel like that's mentoring. Even if it's not explicit, that's mentoring as well. It's sort of looking around and saying, who in your sphere might be good at a particular job? Who can we provide opportunities for? And so that's something that I'm trying to do as well. One of my colleagues does something I call stealth mentoring, which without me realizing it, she's sort of saying, hey, you should do that important thing. Or again, she puts my name in for things. And that's something that I've really taken to heart, and I've found to be hugely helpful for me. And so I'm trying to sort of pay that forward. And so I have that not only with people who I might be working with directly, but other folks in the field who I think, that person would be really good at that. And so let's try to, basically get more people to the table, or get more people involved in different activities by suggesting to them. Because I think folks often don't think about that themselves, or folks might be reluctant to nominate themselves for something. They might be concerned that their skills might not be a great fit for something. But having someone else say to you, you'd be really good at this, it makes a huge difference to me. And so that's something that I'm also trying to pass along to other people.
All of that is so fantastic. And I don't know if I've heard the term stealth mentoring before, but I will definitely use it. I love how broadly you're talking about all the different types of mentoring. I love that you're thinking about style as something that's always progressing and you're trying to get better at, and how wonderful and important that you're also explicitly thinking about things like power dynamics and how to elevate those for whom there might be some power differentials, but to really think of them as peers and to support them and help push them that way. That's so fantastic. Continuing on this mentoring style or ways to mentor, how are you seeing this in your director role with the mentoring network, which is a little different than one-on-one mentoring that you might have with people in your own sphere?
Right. So I haven't been doing that for very long, but my main role there is to solicit requests for folks who are looking for mentoring, like from early career psychologists, but also to recruit mentors, people who have been in the field a little bit longer, and then to basically pair them up. So that's been it's more of an administrative sort of form of mentoring, where my job is to match folks as best I can, which obviously it's never going to be a perfect fit. And this year I was happy to see that we had more mentors than we had mentees. So folks, I think in STP land are excited to be mentors and to give back. I would love to have more people who are interested in being mentored. I'm not quite sure how to find those folks to encourage them, but perhaps your podcast will help. But my job has mostly been in that sort of administrative role. And it is interesting to have that bigger picture perspective of being a facilitator of mentoring, which I like the idea of doing that, because it feels to me like being able to mentor in a different way, that facilitating these mentoring relationships.
Yeah, so we can certainly put in a little plug right now. If you're listening and you are especially an advanced graduate student or early career faculty, this is who the network is really intended to help. Check out STP's website, teachpsych.org, and you can learn more about that network and how to contact Amy about maybe signing up.
Absolutely. Please. We would love to have more folks participating. We've had a lot of success with folks who are who are mentees, who are looking for not only just general teaching advice, but folks who are going on the job market. And so I think we've actually had some decent success of folks who have gotten a lot of really great feedback on how to navigate the job market, especially as the job market, I feel like especially since the pandemic, every year the rules change. And so we have a lot of folks who are mentors who are, let's say, department chairs, who are chairs of search committees. And so we have people who have very current experience in those sort of areas of reviewing portfolios and looking at applications. And I think can be really helpful, again, not only in the general teaching domain, but also can be really helpful in job searching and also navigating that job. So if you get a tenure track job, basically how to be successful to get tenure. So we've got a lot of folks with a lot of really great experience, like I said, who are really excited about of networking and meeting other people and giving back.
Oh, that is so exciting. I think I'm definitely going to have to take advantage of that once I start looking into trying to find my career and stuff. I can use all the help. But Amy, going back over to mentoring a little bit, I know you've talked a bit about kind of how your mentoring style is almost like I don't know if that's the right term. I hope this doesn't come off the wrong way, like a work in progress, like it's always evolving. But I just wanted to see if there was maybe anybody specific who has influenced your mentoring style at this point, any events that you've gone through that have really helped shape that style.
Oh gosh, that's hard. I want to be careful because I don't want to start naming names and then inadvertently not mention someone. I'm utterly terrified of doing that, of inadvertently not mentioning someone who is really influential. So I want to be super careful. I think over the course of my career, I've had a lot of really great mentors. And again, some in a really explicit way, some in a role model kind of way. And there are still some lessons that I sort of think back on watching people or things that I still try to emulate even now, so even back in graduate school, watching my PhD advisor, who was amazing, but things that I sort of learned, again, a lot of it by observation. But I think honestly, like a lot of folks, I've worked with some people who are not always excellent mentors. And so I try to take from that as well as okay, I don't want to do this. Or even things that might have been the norm way back when I was in grad school, which now is a very long time ago, of things that were fine then that are things that we really want to change now. So for example, I think about when I was in grad school, it was just presumed everyone was going to go get a tenure track job and probably an R1, but okay, maybe not. But that was just the assumption that that's what everyone was going to do. And now when I sort of look at or, Google stalk some of my cohort, maybe half of us are in academia, maybe. And so I think this concept of like alt-ac stuff, it was there then, but nobody was talking about it. But I think now people are talking about it more. So I also, in working with, we used to have a grad program, but no longer do, but working with former grad students, working with current undergrads, I try to be really explicit that if you want to do academics, that's my specialty and I know what I'm talking about, and I can certainly help you there. But, if that's not the direction you want to go, that's awesome too. So I'm trying really hard to be a lot more open. But I actually think describing my mentoring style as a work in progress is great. I like to think of my teaching style as a work in progress too. I think, to be honest, I think all of it really should be. I'm always open to learning new things and new ways of doing things. When I think about how I taught when I started to teach, it's a little horrifying compared to what I do now. And I certainly hope that I'm better and I hope that I'm doing things differently. And I think the same thing is true for my mentoring style, especially now. Again, things have just changed so much, just the world around us, academia, so much has changed that I feel like I do need to be paying attention. I do need to constantly be evolving and paying attention because what my students needed 20 years ago is not what my students need today. And same thing with my junior colleagues. What got me tenure is not the same thing as what's going to get somebody tenure now. And I need to recognize that and I need to acknowledge that. And if I were mentoring somebody the same way I did 20 years ago, I would be a terrible mentor. I need to be aware of what's going on in order to be most effective and most hopeful.
Yeah, I have only been teaching for 3 years. And I already find it super relatable talking about how horrifying like your early classes are in comparison to where you are now. So that gives me hope that even later on down the line, when I look back at the classes I'm teaching now, where I'm like, oh, I think these are working, like they're getting better, that I'll be like, oh no, there was so much more room for improvement. But I was kind of curious. So you mentioned a little bit about how like 20 years ago, talking about things like industry, like getting prepared for that during grad school, maybe wasn't so common. And I think now we're really seeing that big shift where it's my roommate's cat. She's going to keep popping up. But yeah, this is usually the time when she creeps in here and like tries to snuggle me. I just have to keep...
my cat is asleep right over there, just out of frame. So yeah, I get it.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect.
It's very relatable.
But I was going to say, so there's this shift now where a decent amount of grad students are getting more interested in industry work. But I think the faculty themselves grew up like, well, they went to grad school in that era where exactly like what you were saying, academia was the almost one and only goal. As a faculty member, how do you prepare yourself to have those conversations or find resources for students so they can be a bit more prepared for industry work?
I don't claim that I'm any good at mentoring somebody who wants to do anything other than academia. I mean, academia is basically all I've known. By coincidence of luck and privilege and hard work, I've managed to always be in academia. So here I am. But I feel like my role in that is more to be really open and explicit that any choice is great. And so I just want to make it clear to students that I encourage them to do whatever's a great fit. I want them to understand the pros and cons of academia. I remember a long time ago, we had a graduate student who was fantastic. She was just so talented and so smart. And I remember her saying something like, oh, she didn't want to go into academia because she watched how hard we worked and she just thought we worked too hard. And I thought, oh, no, but it's great. It's awesome. You really want to do this. And, I don't know quite what she's doing right now, but she's sort of like academia adjacent. So she's doing research primarily, which is awesome. But I remember thinking, oh, no, I sold it too hard. I want to be honest about how hard we work, but I also want to be honest about the perks and the benefits of the job and the many ways in which, it is a good fit for me. That doesn't mean it's a good fit for everybody. So I don't claim that I can advise or I can mentor for anything really other outside my field. I am super good at Googling. I am great at directing people to our career services liaison, who is amazing. We have a great career center at Seton Hall. And so for both grad students and undergrads, I send folks to our career services person. So my job for folks who want to do something other than academia is to validate that as an excellent choice and then to direct them enthusiastically to the career center, because I can't pretend that I really know what I'm talking about once we're talking about anything outside of academia.
No, and as a grad student, I think that's completely fine. I think sometimes maybe faculty just don't know where to start and like what to do when a student approaches that topic with them. And I think that's really cool that you have a good career center that can help students out, and also that you're very proficient in Googling, because that can be helpful too.
It's funny to me how, our students are, I think, digital natives is the term that we're using to describe sort of the current generation of students. And yet, I don't know why it doesn't occur to them to Google things. I feel like that's such an old school technique of anything that I couldn't get by without Google in my life anymore. But it just surprises me. I basically am saying, well, did you Google that? No. Okay, let's Google that together. Let's see what we come up with. And invariably, it's like, oh, wow, what do you know? Yep, what do you know? Let's Google that together. But I also kind of speaks to what I feel like is my style in general, which is that my job is not only to tell you things, my job is to help you find information. And if part of my job is to say, hey, I would Google that, let's Google that together, then that's what we're going to do.
So great. Really loving all these tips and taking down mental notes of how I can be better about these things as well. Something else we've been chatting with all our guests about is DEI, so diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm just curious how DEI may have shown up or not in your mentoring experiences, whether that's as a mentor or someone being mentored.
I think that is the area in which I still have the most work to do, just sort of, in my own professional sphere. At Seton Hall, our faculty, I don't think we're unusual in this regard. Our faculty the vast majority of us are women, as with a lot of psych departments, but also the vast majority are white. And our students are a lot more diverse than that. And so I feel like that is an area where I still need to do a lot of work in terms of understanding how that informs conversations, how that informs relationship dynamics. Yeah, it's a place where it's a space where I really feel kind of inadequate in terms of my job. I feel like that might be the place where I feel like I have the most learning to do still. And I generally struggle with this dynamic that we have where, like I said, our faculty are almost all white. Our students are mostly not anymore. Actually, I think the last numbers that I saw for Seton Hall is that white students are now in the minority of our student body. And again, this is not unique to our department. It's not unique to our university, but our faculty does not represent our students. At least our full-time faculty does not represent our students. So I think if we think about like role models, we all know how important that is in terms of being able to see ourselves as achieving certain things, having role models who look like us is really important. Having relatable role models is really important. And that's then where I get stuck, because it's not like I can create tenure track jobs out of nothing, right? So yeah, all of this is to say I do not have a good answer to that, because I feel like that might be one of the biggest places in my career where I need to spend more time learning stuff. We are working on that as a department. We have a DEI committee in our department. And so that's a space where I feel like I still have an awful lot to learn.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you're absolutely right. This is something that is challenging for many departments. It's not specific to one department. And I really appreciate you pointing out both the sort of individual level work that can be done, but also the system level things, right? We are trying to change recruitment and retention and who's in what positions, especially full-time and positions of power. And it's great that you have a DEI committee there. Are there any things you found particularly helpful, or resources or things you've read or seen, or I don't know, ideas you've heard about that make you a little more hopeful for the future, or where people could start if they're interested?
I have to say, what I look to are my younger colleagues. I mean, it is amazing to me how much more knowledge, especially about DEI issues, our younger colleagues have. So last year, a few colleagues in the department put together just a collection of resources, basically DEI related resources that they sent out to the department. And so some of it is, let's say, information to include on your syllabus. So thinking about things like putting in statements about how to find resources if, students are worried about housing insecurity or food insecurity, resources related to counseling services on campus, but putting those things in your syllabus so that students don't have to ask you for them, because they probably won't. So thinking about, and this is something, so I was interviewed on a prior psych sessions to talk about project syllabus, which is something else I did prior to my current job with an SDP. And so I think a lot about syllabi. So I think about creating a learner-centered, a very student-friendly syllabus. And I feel like some of those things are very similar to this idea of having your syllabus be an excellent resource for your students, putting in statements about welcoming diversity and inclusion in your courses and welcoming students of diverse backgrounds and acknowledging that everybody contributes to the course. It's people's diverse experiences that really make for a much better experience altogether. So again, this is actually someplace where I feel like my newest colleagues are an excellent resource. They know more about this than I do. And I think it's now because it was so long ago that I was in graduate school and we weren't talking about that in graduate school. So I feel like students today are a lot more in tune. They're a lot more aware of those kinds of issues. So again, this is someplace where I look to my colleagues, and especially my most junior colleagues seem to have the best ideas about integrating DEI into courses, into mentoring, into all sorts of relationships.
That's fantastic. And I appreciate that note about the integration, and a very concrete thing we can all do, right, is to update our syllabi. And I think that could be a really helpful tip for anyone who, I know I certainly fall into this sometimes, where, you start diving into it and just feel so overwhelming. There's so much that needs to be done and you can feel very helpless, but to put it into like, well, you have complete control. Well, maybe not complete, right? Depending on where you are, you might need to put in some boilerplate, but you have a lot of control over what goes into your syllabus. And to approach it, I love that, it's also a resource for our students. So what do they need to know to be successful? And integrating DEI, not just this one particular group of identities. It's so many things, right? You talked about housing security and mental health and all sorts of different situations that might be happening or identities, and how they intersect will affect students differently. And so thinking about the syllabus as a learner-centered and inclusive way to make it more likely for students to be successful rather than just, well, I got to throw these things in as a checkbox kind of thing is great.
And I think there are even some ways to, even if you have boilerplate language you need to use, and I understand that is the case at a lot of places that you're required to do certain things, I think there are still ways to make your syllabus more accessible and to change the tone. So, for example, like the rest of us, I have the statement that I'm required to put in about use of disability services. So copy, paste, put it in my syllabus. But I realized the language of that, not friendly. So I have a statement at the very beginning that says something along the lines of, I am happy to work with students who have accommodations. Please reach out to me to tell me how I can best assist you. And then I have the boilerplate language. So even when there is boilerplate language, I feel like there are places where we may be able to just sort of tweak it a little bit or preface it a little bit to acknowledge or to make it more student, more learner centered. And again, to, acknowledge diversity and acknowledge all that brings to our classes. So I think that even if there are things that are required to be on your syllabus, there probably are small changes that you can make that will change the tone and the feel of it.
Yeah, that's great. And I realize we've mentioned Project Syllabus a few times. So for listeners who may not be familiar with it, this is a wonderful project that STP put together. So if you go to teachpsych.org, you can access it. You don't have to be a member of STP to access it. And you can see all the syllabi that are part of this project that have gone through peer review for best practices. You can look at the rubric of how reviewers were reviewing these on things like accessibility and alignment. And if you feel inclined, feel free to submit your syllabus, project syllabus. I've done that for a couple of syllabi, and just getting outside eyes on it with that rubric has really helped me revamp some of them and see things that I missed or see ways that I can make it more accessible, more learner-centered, or more effective.
All right. Well, Amy, you've given us so many good little tips and bits of advice that we can use. But I was wondering, just as kind of like a catch-all, is there any additional advice that you want to give to mentors or those who are being mentored?
Oh, that's a really broad question. I'm going to try not to talk about that for an hour straight because I think that I could. So one of the things that I would suggest is that there's always room to be mentored, regardless of where you are in your career. There's always new things to learn. There's always somebody somewhere who's better at a thing than you are. And I think I'm also recognizing the importance of having mentors in different domains of my life. So I can have a research mentor, and I can have one or two teaching mentors, and I can have a service mentor, and I can have mentors who are in psychology and mentors who are out of psychology. And I also don't have to do everything they say. And I think that's an important thing too, that what worked for one person might not work for me, but also to try to think about, if this is someone who I admire and I respect, and hopefully if they're a mentor of mine, I do, but how might I be able to tweak their advice so that it is more applicable to my situation or to my goals, whatever they might be. So as I progress through my career, doing a better job of explicitly seeking out mentoring opportunities where I don't think that I was always very good. No, I know that I was not always very good at that. And there are a lot of times in my career where I really could have used really good mentoring, but for whatever reason, maybe because I thought I shouldn't, or because I thought everyone else seemed to know things that I didn't know, and therefore I shouldn't ask the questions, that I wasn't actively seeking out mentoring, even though heaven knows, again, there's a lot of places where I really could have benefited from that. So even if you don't want to reach out, again, to look for role models, look what other people are doing. A lot of people are, especially I found in the STP community, are really welcoming, and they really are encouraging, and they really want to work with people, and they really want to give back. So I'd encourage people to reach out and to think about mentors in different domains of your career, and to reach out to folks, to look for mentors. One of the things that I always recommend to new faculty is to find mentors, and again, more than one, but to look for people not only in your department, but outside your department. Because I think having people who know your university and know how it works but people who are not necessarily involved in the politics of your department, that can be super helpful. I always recommend that folks have at least one mentor who will not be voting on their tenure case, because that just makes it so much easier to have a real conversation and to talk about things and to not be worried that someone is going to hold something against you later if you say something, or I think you can speak more freely often in those kinds of situations. Yeah, again, I could kind of keep talking about this, but I'm trying to focus. I think there are so many areas in which so many people can benefit from mentoring and also being mentored, regardless of where you are in your career. If you're in grad school, if you're in a postdoc, if you're in a new tenure track position, if you're an adjunct, wherever you are, I think there's probably some mentoring you can be doing if you want, but there's also space for you to be mentored. There's always other people in the field who have a lot that you can learn from.
That is all really great advice. The thing that really struck me was like having a mentor outside of your field, having a mentor in a different department, because I think you're right. I mean, obviously, I don't know from experience the process of getting ready for tenure promotion is like, but it's just so nice, I feel like, to have somebody who can be on your side that you can go to and you can talk to them about things, have a fresh perspective because they're not involved in all of the nitty gritty parts of your own department, but just also they're going to have, those different perspectives and be able to teach you something that you may not be able to learn from somebody within your own field. And I think that's so important for us to branch out and have those connections.
And I think it benefits, if you're in academics, it benefits your students, for people in each department to not be so insular. And I think we tend to be really insular in our departments, but I think it benefits our students. I think it benefits our research. I don't know about any place else, but in my university, interdisciplinarity is the word of the year. And so they want us to be doing all of these things with people in other departments. And I certainly have benefited an awful lot by working with colleagues in other departments. It really broadens my perspective. And I think the longer I've done this, the more I've sort of narrowed my focus, because I've spent so much time in my department and thinking like a psychologist and thinking like my psychologist colleagues and, training new psychologists, as it were. But it's really been great for me to hang out more with people in different disciplines and to remember, oh, right, not everybody sees things this way. And other people in other departments have really excellent ideas. And maybe some of that I can use to bring back and improve either my department, or if they're not interested, but to change things about the way that I approach my job, to think about things from a different perspective. And I do think collaboration is really the way of the future in our field. When I was trained in grad school, it was very much you sit down by yourself in your lab and you kind of hunker down and do your thing. But now that's not how the world works in terms of collaboration is expected. What we see a lot of these papers have all of these different authors and these consortia that are working together to publish things. And I think that we do better when we include people who are at least slightly outside of our very specific domain. And if nothing else, I find it helpful to talk to somebody else from another department and find out, like, what's the level of crazy over there in your department? And so sometimes it's just nice to have that sort of a little bit of venting of, wow, I can't believe this is happening. I know this happens here too, but it's also nice to sort of have a check and have somebody who you can talk to about. And sometimes it just also makes me feel better about my department. Like, hey, my department's doing really well. Like, your department seems a little crazy, but my department's awesome. So it's just nice to have that sort of comparison, to kind of stick my head out from my office every now and then, or out from my own floor in my building, and get out there into the world and interact with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like thinking, you just brought something to mind to me that, like, as a grad student, I have a few friends who are in other programs on campus. And I'm like, oh, wow, some of the requirements in your program are wild. Like, I'm so glad I don't have that experience. I'm so glad that it's fairly clear cut what I have to do. And they're like, we don't know what's happening. And so it makes me feel a little bit better in a way to see the chaos happening and be like, okay, actually, you know what? My experience is pretty level and easygoing. But also, collaborating with other people. I mean, Mona and I don't really have a collaborator in another field that has helped us with this podcast, not directly anyway. So indirectly, I took a class outside of the psychology department, and I worked with the sociology department and took a qualitative research class. And that's kind of how my involvement in this podcast has happened, is because of my experiences that I had. And it was so eye-opening to me to learn about these new research methods and different tools we could be using that just often aren't used in psychology. And so I truly hope that you're right, that like collaboration is the future, because I have already, just in my short time being in grad school, seen so many benefits of working with other departments and people who I traditionally wouldn't have worked with. And it's just been so, so helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just find it interesting to learn how other fields do things. And yeah, I agree. I find it's interesting, but it also helps me grow to think about things from a slightly different perspective, or if nothing else, to be able to justify why I do the things I do, instead of the answer, which is often because that's the way I was trained or because that's the way I've always done it. But to actually think about that, like, wait, why do I do those kinds of things? Why do I make those choices? But to be able to think about that in an explicit manner and to think about it more deeply. And again, maybe to change something. And my area, as you mentioned at the beginning, is behavioral neuroscience. And certainly in a neuroscience field, that is definitely a very interdisciplinary kind of area to start with. I remember going to the Society for Neuroscience meetings when I was in grad school with, 20 or 30,000 other people. It was kind of mayhem. But there's people from all these different backgrounds, which was really, at the time, super overwhelming, but also really interesting to see all of these people with these very different backgrounds in the same talk. And we're probably all getting something slightly different out of it. And yet we're all there because we kind of have these commonalities. And I think that helps move the field forward when you have people who can think about things from a slightly different perspective.
Thank you for all of that. I'm just listening to you. I was like, oh, I feel myself getting very motivated to go out of my bubble and talk to more people. And it's such a good reminder of all the wonderful reasons to talk to people outside your field. Because I think sometimes you can get bogged down by I'm supposed to, right? It's the hot thing to work across disciplines. And I don't know where to start, but you breaking it down to just start where you are and just, socialize with people and share tea together and figure out what's going on in different departments. And that'll sometimes just naturally morph into, oh, you're doing that work, I'm doing similar work, or right. Hey, we're talking about the same thing, but using totally different words or theoretical models. And
and I should also acknowledge that at this point in my career, I have the privilege of tenure. And so I have the privilege of being able to have a cup of coffee with somebody and spend a couple hours just sort of spitballing about things that may or may not turn into an actual research product. Mm. But I certainly want to acknowledge that, especially for folks who are pre-tenure, that what's important there is knowing what the rules are for your university to get tenure. And then you can hang out with people and have coffee for a couple hours and have a project that may or may not go anywhere. But I want to acknowledge the privilege that kind of comes with my particular position right now, where I can do these things. And if they work, great. And if they don't, I still have a job. So I think that's a really important distinction to make. I certainly do believe that that's all important, this about collaborating with other people. And like you said, I do get fun ideas just by chatting with people from other disciplines. And we have all these ideas for different projects. But again, I just kind of want to acknowledge the position in which I currently am gives me a lot of space and a lot of flexibility to do that I recognize other folks might not have. Well, if you're in grad school, you have plenty of time for coffee, but probably not a lot, right? You probably don't have time to be just hanging out and saying, hey, let's see where this goes. I get that that's a very different space.
So appreciate you explicitly noting that. So yeah, maybe a little more when things are settled and a little more secure, that you can shift more attention into this kind of no deadlines attached, no pressure attached. This doesn't have to go anywhere kind of conversations. Right. Well, thank you so much, Amy, for joining us and sharing all your wisdom and so many great tips about mentoring and how to get the most out of mentoring, whether you're on the receiving end or the providing end, whether that's very obvious or whether that's stealthy. And the way we end these episodes is to ask our guest about their favorite form of self-care, because it's really important to talk about non-work things too, right? So what do you enjoy for self-care?
Oh, let's see. So I love to cook. Relatedly, I love to eat. I do enjoy running, which I need to balance out the cooking and the eating. Yeah, those are sort of, I think, my top ones. I like hanging out with my cats. That's always something about a purring cat works for me in terms of self-care when they deign to hang out with me because they're cats, right? So they make their own choices. I think those are the big ones, especially like COVID-esque. I do I am think I'm an introvert by nature, although I do enjoy hanging out with other people. But again, COVID. But yeah, I think those are sort of the big ones right now.
Those all sound great. I mean, I'm not a runner, so maybe that's the one I would, and I think I saw at least one cat moving around. It looked like a lovely cat. And my lab is actually we all like food quite a bit. So I'm just out of curiosity, do you have a favorite thing to cook and or eat?
I like to try new things. So right now I am obsessed with 2 cookbooks, both of which my husband gave me for Christmas, one last year and the one the year before. So one is called, I'm going to get the name wrong, but it's something like the Vegan Korean or Korean Vegan, which I am not vegan, as you can tell. I'm also not Korean. Wow, this cookbook is good. It is so fantastic. And I, for example, cook with eggs, so I don't use the egg replacement and stuff like that. So I substitute those kinds of products. But wow, it's delicious. And talk about getting me out of my comfort zone. I'm buying all these ingredients and stuff. There's almost no English on the package. I'm not sure if I'm buying the right thing. So that was so much fun to just completely try something I'd never even thought about before. So I still cook a lot of stuff from that. And my current obsession is the Smitten Kitchen cookbook. There's 3. And so her goal is stuff her current cookbook is what I think she calls something for you put recipes for your forever files. So things that you just really love that you theoretically would make all of the time. And I'm working my way through that cookbook. He got me that for Christmas last year. So I'm working my way through that cookbook right now. So that's my idea of fun is I will sit down on the couch and read a cookbook and just make a really long grocery list and then start making things. My favorite thing of hers recently is the salted caramel pretzel blondies. They're really good.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Yes.
They have a lot of butter. They're really good. Yeah.
Ooh, I love that. I'm already looking at those cookbooks.
Yes, I was like, I need to note these down for academic purposes, right? This is related to work.
It's self-care. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Amy, for joining us. And thank you to all our listeners. And stay tuned for more episodes in this series.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was a lot of fun.